Welcome to tonight's session, A Parenting Outside the Box with Erika Barr. I'm so excited to host this talk. I'm Leonora. Erika Barr is a certified conscious parenting coach, a mom to 2 wild boys, a devoted yogi, and an avid animal rescuer and foster mama. As a mom to 2 kids, she's going through the same parenting struggles you are: sibling rivalry, jealousy, aggression, explosiveness, defiance, friend drama, power struggles, and more. These things all come with the territory of parenting. Her goal is to use these daily struggles as a portal to her own awareness, to practice managing her triggers, staying calm, and modeling for her kids what an imperfect but self-aware and always expanding person looks like. As a coach, she helps other parents to do the same, bringing greater calm and connection to their families. Welcome to today's talk, Erika.
Thank you. Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Nicole, for inviting me. So today I want to talk about something that I wished that had been presented to me when I had my first son, and that is parenting kids who are outside the box. And you know, I want to really quickly say though, like I'm going to describe what I'm talking about here, but the rest of what I'm going to say is going to apply to all kids, just a little bit extra for these outside the box kids. So I just want to make that clear up front. So I'm talking about kids who come to us with just a little more spice, you know, like those kids who, when you read the parenting books and they give you all the tips, like they don't, you do the thing that they tell you to do and they don't respond in the way that you were told they were going to respond, right? Those kind of kids. So when I had my first son, he came out and all the nurses immediately commented on how aware he was. And, you know, I would describe him as an intense baby. He was so aware of everything. He reacted strongly to everything. You know, I was in all these moms groups. I joined all these moms groups, and I would, of course, do the thing that you're not supposed to do, which is compare him to all the other babies. And he just seemed like so much more reactive than all the other babies. So fast forward, and I start signing him up for classes, you know, for like a gymboree class and a baby music class, music together. And he's the kid who's, you know, stealing the musical instruments from the other kids, right? Or like, he can't just sit there and clap his hands like all the other 1-year-olds, right? He's crawling over to another one and pulling their hair. Or once he started walking, he would run into the bathroom faster than I could catch him in the music class and pull all the toilet paper off the wall or off the roll, you know? So of course I have this kid and I'm thinking, like, how did I end up with a kid like this? You know, why are all the other kids normal and my kid isn't normal? Like, what am I doing wrong? So I'm asking myself all these questions. Right? So I'm talking about these kids who come to us and really challenge us to step up and see the gifts through their challenges, and then to learn how to support them and to, you know, in the ways that they need, right? Not the ways that we think that we can manipulate them, but in the ways that they need. So I'm talking about highly sensitive kids who maybe have issues with sensory processing, which is what I found out about my son. He was sensory seeking all the time. And I take him to a music class and it's loud clapping, banging, and he's like, pull hair, get away, turn off the lights, you know. Kids with impulse control issues, kids who absolutely refuse all attempts at parental control, right? Some things that are like commonly negatively said about these kids are that they're manipulative, attention-seeking, unmotivated, bratty, spoiled, controlling, resistant, oppositional, defiant, out of control, all these things we've heard, right? But I really like the term Mary Sheedy uses, which is spirited. She says the word that describes spirited children from other children is more. right? More persistent, more sensitive, more perceptive, and more uncomfortable with change than other kids. So, and Webster's dictionary defines spirited as lively, creative, keen, eager, full of energy and courage, and having a strong, assertive personality, right? So when I shift from seeing and start seeing my kid as spirited, right, as creative, as full of energy, as eager and beautifully sensitive, it completely changes the lens through which I view him, right? Because before I was seeing my child as defiant and mean and naughty, and I was seeing his sensitivity as a negative, right? So one of my favorite quotes in the world is from Wayne Dyer, and he says, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And so instead of feeling desperate and like a victim of the circumstances with our child, we can pivot and focus on their strengths, which gives us hope, right? And then in turn, our children feel that, like, especially if you have a highly sensitive kid, they feel everything you feel and everything you think. You know, if you have a highly sensitive kid, you know this, they feel your energy, right? Okay, so easier said than done when you have, when you're dealing with a kid who's more, right? Like, it's so hard to feel compassion all the time when our kid is, having an epic tantrum over the wrong color bowl or distance learning. They're just adamant refusal to do it, right? But these kids came to us to ask us to really step up. They're a gift to us, right? They challenge us to grow in ways that we've never been asked to grow before, because the stakes have never been so high, right? We're raising a human. There's nothing else in life that's going to challenge you to grow in this way. So how do we help them and in turn help ourselves? So first of all, we have to remember what Ross Greene says, which is kids do well if they can. This is like my everyday motto. I have to tell myself this every single day. Kids do well if they can. And he goes on to say, challenging behavior occurs when the demands being placed upon a child outstrip the skills he has to respond adaptively to those demands, right? So these kids are just lacking the skills not to be challenging, right? And they're most likely having an experience that we can't understand, right? So I want to outline 4 steps you can take to understand your spirited kids and ultimately how you can help them long-term and set them up for success. And then ultimately set your relationship with them up for connection. So I want to share my screen. Do I have the ability to share my screen yet?
I see if I can make you a co-host.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to now.
Okay, one sec. Okay, let me just make this big. Okay, so I'm just through this guide for you guys, and then I'm going to share a real life story from my life where I went through this process to figure out a challenging behavior. So step 1 is understanding why, right? So we want to know why this behavior is occurring. When our kids come to us with a challenging behavior, we need to figure out what's going on. So we have to ask ourselves all these questions. Number 1, why? Why is this behavior occurring? What are the underlying feelings? I think most of us know about the iceberg, right? Where the behaviors on the top, the behaviors at the tip of the iceberg, and then we are always responding to the behavior. If we're not paying attention, we're just responding to the behavior. I was responding to the hair pulling, to the biting and all those things. But we want to be looking at the feelings and needs beneath the behavior and responding to that. So that's step 1. Step 2 is understanding when. So what is this behavior happening in relationship with, right? So does this behavior happen every day after school? Does this behavior happen when they're being forced to do something they don't feel comfortable doing, right? And are the demands being placed on the child surpassing the skills they're equipped with? So my son, he started, when we were doing distance learning the end of last year, and he started making these noises that he hadn't made in a really long time. And they're just these like noises that make me need to cover my ears and run for my earplugs, just like screeching noises, right? And so I had to ask myself these questions, like, when is this happening? This is always happening. Every day that he has a writing assignment that he has to do, that's when these noises are showing up, right? Because he doesn't like writing. It's his least favorite subject. And then step 3, understanding resistance. So we're going to ask ourselves, what am I resisting here? So like this shows up in my home with sibling rivalry. That is like one of my bigger triggers that I'm continuously working on when my kids are fighting. So when my kids start fighting, I immediately go into resistance. That's like my instant reaction is like, ugh, why? Right? And I'm not asking why from the standpoint of my instant reaction is not asking why from the standpoint of, truly asking to understand. It's asking why, like, why me? Why again? Why are they making so much noise? Why can't they work it out on their own? Right? And so then I have to step out of resistance. In that moment, I have to step out of me resisting that they're having conflict right now. And this is totally normal. And I'm like jumping into the future, and then I'm making myself a victim, right? So that it's just like in resistance all over the place. And then once we can get out of that, we move into step 4, understanding attunement. So, and this is power of the pause, tune into your child and set them up for success. So of course we have to take a pause first, and that goes with, all the other steps. Right? When we can take a pause, we can move into asking ourselves all these questions, right? And then when you pause, ask yourself all these questions, step out of resistance, you can truly tune into your kid. And then you can figure out, what are the needs that I'm missing? What are the feelings that I'm missing here? And once you can figure that out, you'll easily be able to attune to your kid, and then you can create a situation where you set them up for success. And remember, again, kids do well if they can, right? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share a story with you guys where I used all of these steps. So when Chase was in kindergarten, when he was like 4 or 5, he started calling his brother Doomp Doomp. And I had no idea why he was calling his brother Doomp Doomp. And we couldn't figure it out. But he just called him Doomp Doomp all the time. So keep that in mind when I start to tell the rest of the story, and then we'll come back to it. So when he was in kindergarten, I'd pick him up from school, and his brother would stay home some days. So they're 2.5 years apart. So Chase was about 5. And so his brother would stay home either with my husband or with a nanny that we had a couple days a week. And every day we'd get home from school, and we'd get to the front door, we'd open the door, and Finn, his younger brother, would be standing there, so excited to see him. And Chase would immediately start teasing him, just like instantly insulting him, or he'd push him out of the way and say, "Get away from me. I don't want to see you." And every day. And I couldn't figure out why. They played well together a lot of the time. But just every day he would do this. So I really started thinking I was asking myself, of course, why is this behavior occurring? What are the feelings underneath? Right? And I was thinking, I wonder if this is something sensory related. So I wanted to do an experiment. Let me try out tomorrow. I'm going to come back, pay attention to every detail of the situation. I'm going to pay attention from the minute he gets in the car when I pick him up to us walking in the door. So And then I want to say quickly about the when. When is this happening? It's happening every day after school, and it's happening with what I'm about to say next. So we get home the next day, and we get out of the car and we walk down this pathway. I live in a long house, and so we have to walk past half of our house to get to the front door. So we're walking up, and I start to hear Finn running. And I was like, oh yeah, he does this every single day. And you hear his feet, doom, 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 doom. And I was like, oh my God, there it is. He's calling his brother Doom Doom because of the sound of his feet when he's running in our house. And I immediately said to him, he right away he said, oh no, Doom Doom's coming, like that. And I was like, oh, this is it. And I was like, do you call him Doom Doom because of his feet? And he's like, yeah, his feet, Doom Doom. Just like Doom Doom, Doom Doom, Doom Doom, Doom. I mean, this had been going on for like a year, and we had no idea until I really decided to pay attention to what is going on here. So we get up to the door after the Doom Doom happening, and we open the door, and it's this explosive, yay, mommy's home, Chase is home, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, his nerves are totally shot because we just got home from school, right? And school is hard for him. He's highly sensitive, and it's a lot, right? And he needs downtime. We get home, then the sound of his brother's feet that grate on his nerves every day, but I didn't know. So then he's just like losing bandwidth, losing bandwidth, losing bandwidth. And then we open the door, and then this is explosive hello, and he can't take it. And he has to lash out. He has to just like release the energy that's inside of him. So I felt like, oh my God, I can understand what's going on here now. Finally, like I figured out what's going on here, but how am I going to fix this? Right? So I went through asking why, asking when, and my resistance was in, why are you so mean to your brother? Why do we get home and you're so mean to your baby brother when he's so excited to see you? Right? And so I had to really step out of that to ask myself the other questions. Like the resistance was there really strong. So once I stepped out of that, asked those questions, figured out what was actually going on, I was able to come to the place of, okay, now how am I going to set him up for success? So luckily so I decided I'm going to do an experiment, the next day, see if I can change the situation, change the way we enter our home after school, and see if it makes a difference. So luckily we have a side gate, a side entrance to our house. So we get home from school the next day, and I decide we're going to go in through the side gate. And that way Finn doesn't know that we're home, and he can't tell, and we can enter through our kitchen. So the next day, that's what we do. We get home, we go through the side gate, and we enter my house through our kitchen. And I had a snack already set up for him. So we come in, he puts his backpack down, he starts eating his snack, and then I go into our living room and start and say, greet Finn. And a few minutes later, Chase comes in, and he immediately walks in and starts playing with his brother. Just right away. None of the other behaviors happened. So once I was able to figure out what was going on, ask myself all these questions, right? Step out of resistance, I was able to really tune into exactly what was going on for him and then what he needed, right? And it completely changed. Like we've never had that situation again because, for two reasons. One, because I changed the situation and set him up for success. Two, because I realized, oh my gosh, he's so much more sensitive to noises than I ever realized before. And it makes total sense because he nicknames everything. Like our cat is called Gulp or Gulpa because every time he picks up our cat, she gulps. So he nicknames everything by how they sound, by how it sounds to him. So this has completely changed our life. Just taking these steps and really tuning into my kid. Not only did I change that situation, but I've changed our lives because I can understand him better. So I hope that story really outlines for you what I'm trying to say with the the understanding and transforming challenging behaviors. So with all that said, I want to say a little bit more about things we really need to be mindful of when we have kids that challenge us more, like Mary Sheedy says, more. So remember that, let me see how I want to say this. So I want to talk about respect. We know that conscious parenting teaches us that our relationship with our kids is symbiotic, right? It's not a hierarchy. They're here to teach us just like we're here to teach them. So that's the first part of respecting our kids. We can't ask for our kids to give us, this undying respect when we are not respecting them all over the place, right? And the second thing I want to say in regards to that is that we really need to listen to them when they tell us what they're feeling and what they need. When your kid tells you that they're deathly afraid of something or that they're too tired to do something right now, we have to listen to them, right? Like we often will go to the place of, oh, but they're just being lazy, or if I don't make them do it now, then they're never going to learn how to do it, right? But we all get tired, right? We all are overwhelmed sometimes. We have to listen to our kids when they're telling us what they need. With one of my kids, he was terrified to learn how to ride a bike. And my ego was like, but every other kid in your class already knows how to ride a bike. Like, you have to learn how to ride a bike because everybody else knows how to ride a bike. And I had to recognize that I was totally coming from a place of ego. My kid was afraid and he just wasn't ready yet. That doesn't mean he's never going to ride a bike in his life, right? Because the question is always, like, whenever I say this, I feel like the question is always, but aren't I just letting my kid off the hook? Like, won't I be raising a kid who just won't ever do hard things? My answer is no. If you're connected to your kid and attuned to them, you'll naturally know how far to push them, right? So when Chase was ready to learn how to ride a bike, and he was still a little bit scared, but I could tell he was ready, and now he rides his bike all the time and we're fine. And he's, not an adult who doesn't know how to ride a bike, right? And I want to say something about comparing our kids. Whenever we start to compare our kids, like me comparing him to the other kids who knew how to ride a bike, or like feeling sorry for ourselves that our kid won't do something that everyone else does, we have to bring up their strengths. And it's not just for them, right? It's for us too. We have to focus on their strengths because, first of all, our kids, especially the highly sensitive ones, they absolutely feel this when you're comparing them to other kids, or comparing them to some ideal in your mind, right? And also, your kid will start to mention weaknesses. If they're, an outside the box kid, they're going to notice that there's, maybe more hesitant to do things, or they'll feel shame about their impulsiveness, right? Or they can tell when you're reacting to them more strongly than you're reacting to their siblings, right? Or to anyone else around them. So when they mention this, I want to say, like, don't persist and get into an argument with them. Just mention their strength, right? Just mention their strengths from your point of view. And this wires your child's brain for self-esteem. That's what we're here to do. We want to wire them for self-esteem. And that leads me into the next thing I want to say about things we need to be mindful of. And this is a big one. That is avoiding shame. This is such a big one. When we have like highly sensitive, willful, non-compliant, spirited kids, it's so easy for us to shame them for not being like other kids. We do it without even realizing we're doing it. And we have to remember that as adults, our inner voices are the voices of our parents, right? Like the voices in our head are the voices that our parents put in our head when we were kids. This is so important. And, we want them to feel pride in their unique abilities. right? Rather than shame about them. So, you know, for a highly sensitive kid, you want them to feel pride that they're so intuitive, right? For a kid with ADHD, you want them to feel pride that they have the ability to laser focus on something that they're interested in, right? It's again going back to that quote, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. We have to wire our kids to look at the world this way, from a positive point of view rather than a negative, to feel pride in their gifts. And so, you know, and we want our kids to feel that we love every part of them, the parts that are hard, the parts that come easy to them, right? Because the only way that they can love every part of themselves is if we model for them that every part of themselves is lovable, right? So, you know, I want to say, you know, a little story about when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, I had shame that I was a bad person. Actually, not when I was a kid, like this went well into my 30s. It's still something I had to work on. So my mom and dad divorced when I was a kid, and my dad was always like the bad figure in our family, right? But once my dad was out of the picture, I became the bad guy in our family. And this felt really shameful for me. Like, as a highly sensitive person, I felt this my entire life. My feelings were too big. My anger was too big. My willfulness was too hard to control or to deal with. You know, I was the bad kid and my brother was the good kid. And as a result of that, I never felt safe with my mom. You know, the connection was dissolved early on. And, you know, she was unconscious like a lot of our parents and didn't work on herself. And so it never recovered. We do not want this with our kids, right? So avoid shame, avoid shame, avoid shame, avoid shame. I can't say that enough. That's something we have to be so mindful of. You know, and so I gave you some steps to work on the challenging behaviors, which can be really helpful, but we all know that the real work is on ourselves, right? What parts of ourselves are we comparing? What parts of ourselves are we still shaming, right? When we can shine the light on those parts of ourselves, we can release our kids. We can release the shameful parts of ourselves, and then we can release our kids from ever feeling that, right? And then the last thing I want to say of something that we need to be really mindful of is to just be consistently flexible. Our kids need us to be flexible with them. This is so important. We are often really rigid with our kids because we think that that's what boundaries look like. And then we don't model flexibility for them, right? So I want to read you a lesson from the Parents Tao Te Ching. It's lesson number 76, and it is called Hold Tight Only to Compassion. And he says, it has been said by experts, you must be consistent or your children will be confused. Nonsense. Who among us is consistent? Circumstances are always changing. Children become confused when parents become rigid, holding rules above love. Be consistently flexible. Hold tight only to compassion. So good, right? So good. So I don't know if you guys can see this. I can't see myself, so I can't tell if you can see this, but it's the Parents Tao Te Ching, and I'm telling you, if you ever, and it's written by William Martin, if you ever have a single issue in your life ever, just open this book. I promise you the right lesson will show up for you. It is just, it's gold. So, you know, about flexibility, there's really nothing that a spirited child resists more than rigidity. Like, if you have a spirited kid, you know, or any kid, kids hate when we're rigid, right? And rigidity models rigidity. So with these children, above all, we must model flexibility because we're asking them to be flexible for us, right? you know, we know this is behavior we want to change, but then we're completely rigid ourselves. We're, you know, we've got to stick to the schedule, you know, we've got to stick to the rules, right? So we have to sort of release that and get present in the moment and really hear our kids and model flexibility for them. Okay, so the very, very last thing I want to say though is that just to continue to work on yourself. You know, continue to ask yourself the hard questions. Continue to ask yourself the questions, you know, that I shared with you before, but ask yourself the deeper questions about yourself. Just always working on yourself to become a better person, really. You know, when your kid comes to you with an issue, remember to look within. Recognize that this is an opportunity for you to uncover parts of yourself that are being neglected, right? Every situation in our life comes to us for a reason. Our kids are bringing them all the time. So it may look like an issue for your kid, but it's really an issue for you to work on yourself, right? You know, the most important thing we can do for our kids is to continue to parent ourselves, right? It's not easy. I will say it is not easy, but we can all do it, and it's just a process. So that's what I've got for you today. And I hope this was really helpful, and I'm really grateful for all of you for showing up, and thank you, Nicole, for inviting me.
That was really good. I have a page of notes here.
Oh, good, thank you.
I have a page of notes because there's a lot of information that you shared. And what resonated deeply with me was that our children are like mirrors to things that we need to work on with ourselves. And it's a consistent process of evolving, right? So we've got to unlearn the negative sort of programming that we've had from our parents, because unconsciously we parent our children the same way, and then they reflect back to us things that we need to change. So that's what I've taken from today's talk. And that feels like a lot of work. So it's almost like you said, every situation happens for a reason. So these children come to help us evolve and grow so that we're sort of living within our highest potential. We're the best version of ourselves that we can be. So that makes a lot of sense, because I have a little one here, and lately she triggers me a lot. It's not her. I realized that it's me, because I said, okay, this can't be normal that I'm getting so like hurt all the time. And I've decided to take sort of happy mummy breaks. So because I realized that I was getting quite snappy, and that's not the connection that I wanted to have. So I realized that, you know, I needed to have time for myself at certain points in the day where I was getting really tired and less able to deal with like the whining and things like that. But I wanted you to touch more on the flexibility part of things, because I think that's a really important thing, because from where I come from in Trinidad, and Nicole could understand this as well, we don't really have that ingrained within the culture. It's a do as I say sort of mentality, right? And there's no choice, there's no flexibility in that. And so I always thought that, and actually I felt so free when you read that quote. What was it? I highlighted it. Holding rules above love. I felt so free with that, because that we shouldn't hold rules above love, right? Compassion should always be first.
Yeah.
How do you? So to me, I'm still trying to understand that, because in my ideal world, I know the structure that I want her to have for the day. I know the things that I wanted to accomplish for the day. I work best on structure. Now, sometimes it's very stressful, because if you're not like at 5 o'clock, you know, going for a walk, or she's not like having dinner or something like that, it's like, oh my God, the whole day is messed up, and then you get stressed and she's stressed. So how do you embed? Because that's something I definitely want to take on board, because immediately when you read that, I was like freedom, like, you know, like I can just go with the flow of the day and not just be so, you know, singularly driven. Yeah. How do you, what's your advice for people who don't live within that country?
Well, first I want to read to you what he says. When you turn the page, he gives a little explanation of his everyone, and I feel like because it resonated, I want to read this to you. So he says, As people age, they become either soft and supple or hard and brittle, both in mind and body. I've seen profound examples of each type. So have you. Which are you becoming? Children are flexible in body and in spirit. The greatest gift we can give them is to become the same. So I think for me, it's, I'm always reminding myself that, like, look, my kids, they are really flexible, right? They're like, our kids are really flexible. Even when they look like they're being rigid, like kids who have hard times with transitions, they're really flexible because they have to be, because we're kind of forcing them to be all the time, right? So I'm learning from them. And then I'm also reminding myself that the rules I've set up for myself to make me feel like I'm more successful are disconnecting me from my kid. So what I hold higher than anything else in my relationship with my kid, there's nothing higher than my connection with them. So when I can see that I have to stick to the schedule and we're getting it, you know, we can see, once you become conscious, you can see right away when you're disconnected from your kid, right? Once I see that, I'm like, oh, do I want to put that fracture in my connection right now? Right? And so, and it's interesting as your kids get older, it's so hard when they're young because you have nothing to compare it to. You're like, if I'm really flexible now, does that mean that they're just going to like never do anything, right? And they're not going to be able to stick to any rules, and they're not going to get their assignments done on time. So when they're young, you're thinking all this stuff. But as they get older, you know, you start to see, wait, it's actually the total opposite. They see that we're being flexible with them, and that, oh, of course, my kid's school is calling right now. Not great timing. So they see that we're understanding them, right? And that fosters more connection. They just want to know that we understand them. And so I know it's hard when you are a person who thrives on structure. I think you just have to spend time asking yourself, like, is this really true? Do I really need this structure? Why is this making me feel safe, right? What can I do to make myself feel safe in another way so that I can have the freedom to stay connected to my kid in those moments, right?
Yeah, that's good. I have a question to ask on that. And if any of you have questions, do feel free to chip in. So with the flexibility part, so say, for example, we have a few hours to get something done that's important, and she's really not feeling it, but it is something that we need to get done. And I'm mindful that, okay, it's causing a little bit of discord between us. Mm-hmm. How flexible do you go? Do you just let it go? Because to me, this is a whole new concept. With like letting that structure go. So how flexible do you get?
Well, I think again, it goes back to the attunement. So like, I think it takes practice. I want to say that it takes practice, right? So you can sense, and once you start practicing this, you can sense how flexible you need to be, right? There's some things, so like Dr. Shefali talks about stone boundaries and sand boundaries. So there's some things that we have stone boundaries around. Pick very few of them, but on those you can stick to it, right? Like, so a stone boundary in my house is that my kids have to brush their teeth at night. They just have to brush their teeth at night. Morning we can be flexible on, but at night they have to brush their teeth. It's a stone boundary. And so, rule that we have written down, and it's framed, and they know, like, this is one of those things, you know, it's a stone boundary, and they know it's called a stone boundary even too. And then with other things, so I have lots and lots and lots of sand boundaries, right? And then if so with, remind me the example you gave with your daughter.
I didn't give you an example, but like, let's use education, because that's something I've been struggling with massively. Since, and I think a lot of parents with the distance learning, and for me, the consistency with the education is important. And we've had a lot of fractures with that, a lot of tension. But it has created that disconnect between us, and it's not a good one to have with education. So if she's not willing to do work, and I know she needs to get that work done, and I've got time away from my work to sit with her, or not, and I set her work out for her, how flexible? She's like, Mom, I don't feel like doing it. Am I just like, okay, fine, whenever you feel like it? Like, how flexible do you get with an 8-year-old?
Right. No, I think it's a conversation that you have with her, right? So like, because most of the time, I totally get this. We give ourselves, when you're working, like you have this one chunk of time and you're like, you got to get it done while I can sit with you in this one chunk of time. It's so incredibly hard. But if she's not like, our kids can quickly go into downstairs brain. When we start arguing with them about doing schoolwork, right? That they can be an upstairs brain and quickly go into downstairs brain. And then we can't even get through to them. So once it starts escalating, you've already lost her. She's not going to get her work done anyway, right? So I think the flexibility part comes in when you have to let go and say, damn it, I probably am not going to get my stuff done, or she's not going to get her stuff done this morning. So let me have this conversation with her. What do you think you're capable of doing today? Right?
That's a great way to do it.
You just talk to her, and then she'll feel like, okay, my mom's understanding me right now. She understands that I can't do this right now. And of course, some kids will push more than others. Some kids will be like, well, I'll do it next week or whatever. But you say, okay, here's what I need. Here's what you need. How can we come to somewhere in the middle? And let her think that she made the decision, because a lot of times kids need to know that they have a say in things, that it's not just us demanding, right? So come to some sort of middle ground where she feels like she said what she needed, like she got heard and you understood it.
That's brilliant. What are you capable of today? I love that. I've got one more question. Going back, because I think at the what's the word that I'm looking for? The sum total of all of this comes down to that inner dialogue that we're having with ourselves, and the expectations that we've set for ourselves as parents, almost based on the narrative that we've picked up from how we were parented, right? And that's really, really deep, especially if you've got two different types of parents. Obviously, not two parents are the same, right? Well,
yeah.
Two parents, it's possible, right? Because chicken head, like, yes. But if you've got like parents who are like have completely different parenting styles, which I did, and there's almost, because my father was very rigid, my mother was very flexible, right? My dad was very tight-fisted, my mom was very free-handed. So very, very different ways of being raised. So I've got, like, when I do certain things with Viv, I'm sort of wavering between the two. So what are some tips that you have for parenting yourself? Because I think, a lot of it is inner child work. I know, I can tell that. But is that it? Is there more?
Yeah, I think that's the most important piece. For me, certainly that has been the most important piece. What was the game changer with my kid? The game changer was when I started really working on myself. My kid suddenly became a completely different kid. My kid didn't become a completely different kid, right? I became a completely different person who could show up for my kid in the way that he needed, right? So I think that the inner child work is really important. And I think also just being so conscious, like what you just said about your parent, one of them being rigid and one being really flexible, being so conscious of the scripting that you have, right? That like a lot of times the rigid parent is the one that sticks out in our mind, because they're the one that put all the fear into us, and fear's, guiding everything, fear in every part of our lives, and especially when we're raising our kids, right? And so the rigid parent put the fear in us, and then we're always coming back to the fear, right? It's always coming back to the fear. We don't realize it, but it is. And so recognizing, oh, here I am in fear again, just being so conscious of that.
Yeah, it's really deep. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Erika, I wanted to add to that. This has been a really beautiful conversation. I think sometimes we want the answer to be complex because we think it's such a hard thing to work on, when sometimes it's really simple but not easy. Simple but not easy.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of your work with completing to parent yourself, or to use the awareness that you're growing to really drive change. I think we're set up already naturally to see where we have to learn. And that's if we just take our triggers as the invitation. If you take a log of every time you get triggered, nothing else, just every time you got triggered within the day, and then you sit in a quiet moment and you go through those triggers and really work to find out what's beneath them. What is it coming up to help you heal, coming up to help you learn? And you do that consistently in no time, because we don't have a lot of triggers. We have a few triggers that come up over and over and over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
But in a really short space of time, you would have addressed the big things that rock you off your stability, that push you off of your connection with yourself. And then you'll find you'll have the space to be more patient and to be more playful, and to stay connected to your daughter, because you're staying connected to you. But when you don't deal with those triggers and they knock you off and bounce you around, then it's difficult to stay connected to her, because in that moment, you're no longer connected to yourself. And I think, so sometimes simple isn't easy, but it is still simple if you're willing to stick with it. And then Erika, I had a question of my own. So yesterday I was talking to a mom who is recognizing, he hasn't been diagnosed yet, but she's recognizing signs in her son that he may have ADHD. And I think while that in itself was a scary thing for her in terms of what it would mean for him and the way he would navigate the world, what was really, you can tell, hurting her at her core was that he was beginning to create a self-narrative that wasn't positive. So he thought of himself as stupid in school because his friends were doing a lot better. Everybody else can figure it out. I can't, because clearly my brain doesn't work. I'm stupid. If he's acting out because he's got all that pent-up energy and no positive outlet, then he is now viewing himself as a naughty boy. And I think I can see the pain in a mom's eyes of thinking she's doing her best to give her son a great narrative, and no matter how much she reinforces that he's a good boy and he's clever, and she shows him where he's competent, because he's comparing himself to his peers and maybe taking home some of the narrative from teachers at school, he's now adopting a negative self-perception. So how would you advise a parent in that situation?
Yeah, I think it is a really hard situation. And I think that, again, the work is going to be on herself. I mean, she wouldn't be bringing it to you, right, unless it's hurting her at her core and it's triggering something in her, right, from when she felt something when she was a kid, right? So of course the work is going to be on her, constantly on her, and on her really truly believing in his gifts. Like, I would recommend that she sits and writes down every gift she can possibly think of about her kid, and reads that paper to herself for a half hour straight, just really focuses on those strengths and floods her brain with those strengths, because that's the energy she's going to give to her kids. When she's flooded with that, that's the energy he's going to feel for her. And we can't control what happens at school or with our kids' peers, right? And which is so hard. So that's another thing, like also maybe her looking at her desire for control around how people respond to him. But she's got to flood her brain with that, so that when he comes home, he knows that he is this special, loved, incredible human being who came here to share his gifts with the world, and that's his path.
I love that. I tell you what I really love about that, Erika. I think there are many times when, as parents, we want to fix the world to match how our kids feel. So the kids on the playground didn't play with my child. Well, tomorrow I'm going to talk to them about that, because they can't not play with my child. Or I'm going to talk to the teacher to make sure that my child is included in the game. And I think there has to be a recognition that this world is here to challenge us. It was never designed to be a walk in the park, breezy, or airy fairy. It's designed for us to grow, and you grow through the challenges. And so if you recognize that the challenges are the good things, and maybe if they come in for your kid sooner than you'd expected, because they're more of something, Maybe it's
Yeah.
because they have the ability to also have more of the skills they need. Maybe they have the ability to have more resilience. And so maybe you can turn that narrative around and be able to show your kids that it doesn't matter what the world throws at you. You've got what it takes. And for me, that's that's definitely the position I want my kids to have. Because I
Yeah.
know I will not always be there to be the cushion that they fall on. But I
Right.
want them to be able to look within, and I want them to hear my voice saying, "You've got this."
Yes.
That's the voice I want them to hear. Like, no matter
Yeah.
what comes at you, you've got this.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're saying that you're 100% right. So spot on. It has to start with you, because if you have doubt that they're capable to handle what's coming at them on the playground or what teachers may be saying, they pick up on that, and then they no longer have the confidence that they can do it. Because if mommy has doubt, then it must be true.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I love the part about resilience too, because most of us haven't been taught about resilience. Like us as parents, we don't know anything about resilience, right? And so I think this is such a great opportunity for her to also learn about resilience for herself. How do we teach our kids about resilience when we don't know anything about it for ourselves, right? We're not practicing resilience.
We've got a question from Norma and Juliana. Thank you for your note there. Dr. Ted Hallowell on ADHD is amazing. Please ask her to check it out. So thank you for that contribution. We've got a question from Norma Murphy. How do we deal with bullying? My child is being bullied by her friend, shouting at her and calling her a spoiled brat.
Yeah. So it's a lot like what Nicole and I were just talking about, right? Where we can't control their interactions with other people. We can only set our child up for resiliency and for just the ability to hold a boundary. I'm not sure how old is your daughter?
Norma, you still there? 9.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Thank you, Norma.
So she's definitely old enough, right, to hold a boundary. I think, it's a question of how you're viewing the situation too, right? Like what Nicole and I were just talking about, where we so desperately want to get involved and we want to fix it for them. I definitely had this situation with one of my kids too. And I had to just recognize that this is going to show up and I can't control it. So all I can do is build my kid up and hopefully, show my kid will be built up enough to where he's going to end up not hanging out with this person anymore. He's going to recognize that I don't feel good around that person. You can talk to them about, well, how do you feel when such and such happens? And then also there's role playing, which I don't care how old a kid is. I'm talking even teenagers. I think role play is such an amazing tool. And not only is it a great tool to teach, lessons that we want our kids to learn, but it's also really connecting because it's fun and you can make it really dramatic. And so I would recommend role playing, like taking 2 stuffed animals and role playing, your daughter is one and this other child is another, and different scenarios that come up, right? Like you can start as the person who's doing the role play, and then you can have, then you can ask her if she wants to join in. And a lot of times kids will want to be the bully, right? And they'll want to act that out. And then you role play and then you ask questions like, how could she have handled that differently? How could I have handled that differently? And it tends to be really helpful because, when you try to talk to your kid about something, they just don't want to listen. When you're trying to teach them about something, a lesson, they don't want to listen. You have to get really connected with them. And I think role play is such a connecting way to be with your child, that their brain is primed for learning. So I hope that helps.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Can I just add to that, please, Nora? So I think it's an opportunity, Norma, again, to look at how you can get your kids to have more of the good stuff. And for me, so like I remember my son might have been about 8 or 9 the first time he had an experience of being bullied. Someone took his snack away from him, snatched his snack away. And I remember when he told me, I literally felt the fire inside of me like burn. It was like boom, right? To the point where I remembered that I couldn't respond right away. Like I had to say to myself, don't say anything for a few minutes. And we drove home. So I was picking him up after school. We drove home, and on the drive I stayed quiet. And then I got home and I realized I'm still not ready and I had to stay quiet. And then I asked myself, what do I want him to really learn about the world and about people? And when I sat and I answered that question for myself, it made it really easy for me to then go and talk to him about having that experience. Because for me, what I want him to learn about the world is that people are all the same. We've all come from a place of great light. And anytime we're acting in discord with that, anytime we're acting like we're from a place of angst and anger and meanness just coming out, it's because we've stepped away from our light. And that's the way I wanted him to see this boy that was being mean, that this was a boy. So we had a conversation about, how do you have to feel inside in order to treat somebody this way? What has to be happening for you? And it changed the entire narrative. The focus was no longer on I'm the victim, but the focus really swapped to, how can I be a positive player in this space while keeping myself safe? And also recognition that if somebody was being mean, it actually had nothing to do with me. You understand? If she was shouting and calling me a spoiled brat, that literally has nothing to do with me. That has to do 100% with what's happening on the inside of her that's pouring out. And for a long time, it allowed my son to be able to be a safe space for a child who was considered to be the bully. And he was able to say, you know what, you can do it this way. Try to be kind, remember the rules. And he was kind of like a good voice in the air saying, come on, you can do it. But there was a point where he got to that said, you know what, I don't think this person is ready to make the changes they need to. And I need to protect my space. But I think the ability to do that came with the ability to recognize the humanness in all of the activity. And for me, that was a greater lesson than saying, let's see how we can remove you from that situation, or how do I protect you? Because you find bullies everywhere in the workplace and you can't always run away from them. You have to be able to figure out, how do I stay in this space without allowing your discord to impact my energy, and still come and show up with compassion. So I hope that helps. And I think you can definitely be able to translate that in a role play scenario. That's an easy one, right? Like, especially if you're playing with 2 stuffed toys, and one stuffed toy, something happens to him, and then he obviously starts coming back to the other one with anger. So you can kind of play the story back and goes, well, what happened before he was angry? And kind of show that something usually has to happen with somebody before they act out in that way. So I hope that helps, Norma.
That's so good. Also, like, I want to really emphasize what you said about, recognizing that we all came from this light, right? And that we're all the same. I think it's so, we want to teach our kids that, right? But we have to truly believe that ourselves. And we get so triggered by this other kid who we call them a bully. We've all done it, right? And so we can't even see it ourselves. And then we're like, but we want to teach you to see it, so we really have to take that pause, like you talked about, and really be able to tap into that sort of higher mountaintop space when we're looking down at the situation.
That's really good, guys. Some good conversation happening there tonight. Does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up for tonight? No? Well, Erika, I'd like to thank you so much for joining and for hosting this lovely talk. I, for one, have had a few major shifts, and I say that genuinely. Like,